Have you ever been in a situation where tension builds right before your eyes, but you're not quite sure when or how it started? Recognizing escalation, the subtle shifts that signal someone is moving away from their baseline state, can be the difference between effective interventions and full-blown crisis. Today, we're unpacking the process of recognizing escalation, how to identify early signs, the stages involved, and how to manage not only someone's escalation, but also your own as well. Whether you're a caregiver, teacher, or parent, understanding escalation is a vital skill for creating safer, calmer environments. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're talking about recognizing escalation. Now, most people have heard of the term escalation before, and many of you will have heard of the term de-escalation. One of the things I would break down de-escalation, there's kind of three elements to it. Most people tend to only think of one, which is calming an escalated person down. Somebody's already heightened, we go in and we then look to de-escalate, bring them down from there. But actually, there's numerous stages in de-escalation. One is preventing them from going up in the first place. We can prevent escalation through the principles of de-escalation. The other one is preventing them going up too far. If we can recognize and then intervene early stages, we might have a chance of this person not going to the full crisis level. We can interrupt that escalation process. So de-escalation actually has three elements to it. But the important part of it, that's important for all of those, is we need to know how to recognize escalation potentially occurring. So escalation happens when an individual moves away from what we call their baseline state, their usual state of calm or contentment, and begins progressing towards a crisis state. This shift can be triggered by stresses, frustrations, unmet needs, and recognizing it early can really help prevent situations from spiraling out of control. It's important to remember that escalation doesn't look the same for everybody. While there are general signs, many indicators are unique to the individual. This makes understanding both general patterns and personalized cues essential. The first step in recognizing escalation is knowing what does somebody look like or how do they act when they are in their baseline state. A baseline is their typical state of being, when they're calm, content, and at their best. So for some, baseline state might be being really talkative and animated. For others, it might mean being really quiet and focused. When you know what's typical for somebody, it's easier to notice when they start moving away from that baseline state. So having information about their posture, their movement, facial expressions, how do they communicate? How do they verbalize? How do they vocalize? Do they talk a lot or a little? Do they make certain noises when they're happy? What's their typical facial expressions when they're happy and contented? It may seem obvious, but we have to remember that many people who are listening to this are working with individuals who may not engage or behave in typical ways. So we need to make sure this is not only having a general understanding, but also having an individualized understanding. Now, the second part of when we're moving out of that baseline state, we then need to recognize that escalation for many individuals is a bit of a journey. Now, although that journey can be extremely fast for some, and some people or individuals seem to go from that baseline state to full crisis just on a turn of a coin, okay? Jekyll and Hyde kind of switch. However, that may be because they don't recognize their own internal signs. They don't have the same ability to self-regulate or to emotionally regulate or behaviorally regulate in that situation. So it can seem very, very sudden. Okay, so we may only have a very short window sometimes, but it doesn't tend to always happen at once. It does, many follow a kind of distinct stages, if you like, but they are arbitrary as far as how they move through. The starting point, though, is there's a trigger or a stressor of some description. Okay, now something occurs that initiates the escalation. It could be a misunderstanding, it could be sensory overload, it could be, well, we've done the episode on the help, as in, is it human, is it emotional cognitive, is it location, or is it physical, or is it some kind of unmet need, the need to gain or to avoid something that we perceive as a threat or dangerous. In that early stage, that trigger, whatever it is, then obviously starts to lead into escalation. Now, at the lower escalation, signs begin to appear. We might notice things like fidgeting, changes in tone or restlessness. And if we think about, I've mentioned on the podcast a few times, kind of the alarm bell principle. The alarm bell's starting to go off, or if we used a fire as an analogy, the embers are starting to glow. It's at that early stage, and if we can recognize that, we're obviously, the individual starting to go into their fight or flight mechanism. Now, you'll see this for people who are able to emotionally regulate. We all do this to some degree, where we initially start feeling agitated, but then we'll do things to kind of self-regulate. We'll take a breath to try and control ourselves. If we don't feel that coming in the same way, we may not have the opportunities or have the skills to be able to then self-regulate. In that early stage, though, if we think of like the brain, the emotional brain and the rational brain are still balanced with each other. I'm feeling emotional, but I still have some level of rational control. As we go to the higher stages of escalation, that's when the intensity increases, the bigger emotions are going to start to come out. We might notice that then voices raise or volume goes up. We might find movement becomes more erratic. We might even find things like, changes in facial color or increased breathing rate, or we might get some posturing going on as the person kind of is getting ready for their fight, flight, or freeze kind of state. The final point is this crisis, the peak of the escalation, where the individual may lose rational control. Their emotional brain takes over, becoming overwhelmed or even aggressive. And whether that's referred to as amygdala hijacking, where that amygdala takes over, or just emotional hijacking, the emotional brain just takes over. So at the height of escalation, the emotional part of the brain, the amygdala, just takes over. And it inhibits the ability to then think as rationally or think about consequences or be able to empathize in the same way or see things from other perspectives. During this time, the fight or flight response is going to dominate. And it's important that we then trying to find those appropriate strategies, the appropriate responses to help the individual to gain control, as well as making sure that they and others are safe. So within my book, Targeting the Positive with Behaviors that Challenge, I do have a bit of a visualization of this, which is the roller coaster. And I talk about, obviously, everybody's roller coaster is a little bit different. We all go through different journeys as far as their emotions are concerned. Some people seem to go up very, very quickly, and some people stay angry for a long time. It takes a long time to re-regulate. Other people, the journey is very flat and they have tiny little bumps, but that's about it. Some people, the journey doesn't just take them up, it takes them down into a disassociated or a freeze response state. Now, everybody's roller coaster can vary. Like if we were to sort of give the example, like let's say you think about your own roller coasters, different environments, different situations can change what your roller coaster looks like. So you only think about most people, their roller coaster tends to be, or their escalation, it takes a long time to get people as angry in places like work with colleagues, but it tends to be a different reaction or different situation than if we were at home with our loved ones. Because we feel safer, there's less inhibitors, and therefore our roller coaster will look different. If something like alcohol was involved, that's where you see then people's roller coasters is completely different from the norm. Now, the reason I like the roller coaster analogy, one is because every person's is different, but also it's a kind of an element or a metaphor for introspection. That click, click, click bit we get at the beginning of the roller coaster is that journey going up to the point of crisis. But when we're at the bottom of the roller coaster, we can get off. When we're at the top of the roller coaster, that's where we're on the ride. So the best chance we've got of being able to get off the ride is in the bottom stages, in the earliest stages that we notice it. Also, after a roller coaster, obviously, it has to come back down again. The emotions will die off. They will de-escalate. Now, how long that will take will vary from person to person. And some people it's minutes, well, typically 20 minutes, but it could be some people it's days. The nervous system is playing a big role here. The SNS, or the sympathetic nervous system, ramps up during escalation, makes us faster, stronger, anesthetized to pain, shuts down areas of the body that aren't as important. So it increases heart rate, it increases breathing. Then after the crisis, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and then it starts going into our rest and digest state, helping the body return to calm. Now, it's important to recognize, though, that while the alarm bell's slowly starting to then turn down, it's very easy to set it back off again. So it's really important that we allow people to fully re-regulate and calm. Signs of escalation. If we think about what's going on in the body, if we're going into that fight or flight state, blood flow is increased to the larger muscle groups, making us faster and stronger. Well, that's why you see jiggly legs when people are nervous. That's why people fidget and pace and can't sit still when they're feeling anxious or they're starting to get angry. Because the body is getting ready for action state, for mobilization. So they can be pretty typical signs from lots of people. We might find we get muttering, they're struggling to focus and concentrate on what they're doing very well. You might find they're shifting around in their body language, or they're a bit more erratic in their movement. We might find changes in their pitch or tone or volume. Or we might even find changes in what they're saying. So if an individual has a limited vocabulary anyway, the number of keywords will deteriorate when they're getting agitated. Just like two guys squaring up to each other outside of a pub, before they start pushing, their level of communication doesn't tend to be at its most articulate. They tend to go into what we call monosyllabic communication, the yes and the so's and the what's. They don't be able to then struggle to have a full comprehensive conversation. And that makes perfect sense as far as that alarm bell. I don't need to be talking to the lion I'm fighting or running away from. And therefore, it's not an important part of the brain. So while general signs are helpful, it is really crucial to recognize that everybody is different. One person's early sign of stress might be fidgeting, while others might be withdrawing completely. Some behaviors we might see are a person's attempt to self-regulate, to self-stimulate. So I work with individuals who start singing when they're getting agitated, and that's a warning sign that they're going up, or whistling, or smiling, that aren't typical behaviors, but it's them trying to either self-regulate or they're kind of non-typical ways that we can recognize that they're getting agitated. One thing that is worth considering, and in my book I refer to them as pre-communicators, but pre-indicators may be a better phrase for it. Many individuals give subtle signals before their behavior escalates. It's not until, for us, most people don't notice until the behavior of concern or the behavior that challenges is actually being displayed. I saw this in an interesting documentary, actually, where it was a lady who was consulting at a school. She was sitting at the back of the class, monitoring the students. And there was one particular lad that the teachers kept referring to as, he just goes. There's no warning, there's no lead in. Suddenly, he's just acting out. But when this third party was sat at the back of the room and they had the time and the ability to be able to just monitor what this lad was doing, the lad was indicating little subtle clues. So, for instance, this was in a classroom. He dropped his ruler 3 times on the floor and picked it up. He then started to just move around and rock a little bit and bump into the kids on either side of him. He got up to go to the toilet a few more times and just walked backwards and forwards in the room. They were not huge things and they weren't disruptive enough to draw the teacher's attention. The teacher's obviously trying to pay attention to 29 other kids minimum within the room. But it was a consultant who kind of recognized he started. He's already going up. He's not showing any antisocial signs, but he's already going. A few moments later, he was then stealing certain things and running around the room and acting out that was then drawing the teacher's attention towards him. By that point, it's going to be 10 times harder to be able to then recognize and re-regulate. It needed nipping in the bud as soon as those early signs occurred. But that's the challenge, isn't it? Do we notice it? Are we aware of it? If we can pick up on those pre-indicators, if we can pick up on those pre-communicators, they give us a really good chance. And we might find that that could be for some individuals echolalia or certain behaviors or repetitive phrases, certain facial expressions, just little bits. And the more we notice, or the more we watch for them, the more we can notice them. Many people demonstrate what we call micro-expressions. And that's very difficult to see unless you actually slow it down. There's some wonderful work by a guy called Paul Ekman on micro-expressions. You can actually go online and you can do some tests where they'll have a person's face and they'll just flash up a micro-expression for milliseconds. And with practice, you can get really good at picking them up. It's what they've done in numerous situations by looking at media, and they're looking at people in the media and they'll slow down the footage to see little flashes of anger, but then they regulate. So there's loads of little indicators that if you know what you're looking for, you can spot them. Let me give you an example. Many of us know when our best friend is not in a good place because we're so used to their baseline state, we're really good at picking up when they're not okay. And this is what we should be doing or trying to do with the individuals that we're supporting. We need to be like that best friend, watching, knowing them so well that we know those early indicators. Because your subconscious brain picks up on warning signs of behavior far quicker than your rational brain does. When we're thinking about, it's not just about watching the individual though, it's about being aware of the environment as well. When we're thinking about escalation, if we know the individual really well, we might notice if that person walks into the room or this person that they know walks into the room, we know that's already going to be a potential indicator because that's a trigger for them. So are there external stressors like noise or crowded spaces that contribute or we know contribute to that roller coaster going up? Are other people in the room reacting in ways that are adding to the tension that we can see, well, other people. Staying situationally aware helps us to address the potential triggers in the environment before they start to fuel the escalation further. One important aspect that we also need to add on as far as this podcast is concerned, this episode, is we also need to recognize our own escalation. Recognizing escalation isn't just about other people, it's also about you. Caregivers, teachers, and parents are not immune to stress. And although stress isn't always a bad thing, and there's an actual optimum point of stress being really useful, we do need to be very aware of how we're communicating our stress. Are we giving away signals that we are agitated, frustrated, or irritated? Your own escalation can influence the situation. So looking out for those feelings in your stomach, that increased heart rate. Think about your shoulders and just pause for a second. Go, where are my shoulders in this moment? Because you might find you're holding your shoulders tense without even realizing you're doing it. So just relax them. Is your mouth getting dry? Are you getting snappy or raising your voice? Are you aware and in control of your emotions? Because for you to be able to control any situation, you ideally need to be in control of yourself first. So recognizing escalation, the book will talk about it. It's not just recognizing it in others, it's recognizing it in yourself. Know the person's baseline. The better you know the individuals that you're supporting and working with, the better you know what they are like when they're okay. Which gives you a much better chance of recognizing what they look like when they're not okay. Look for patterns as well. Any tools like behavior charts, incident logs, ABC charts, mood charts we've done on previous podcasts help us to identify reoccurring triggers as well as early signs of escalation. Respond early as well. It's so easy to just go, that's not my problem right now. I've got bigger things to do. Unfortunately, they're ignoring it. That escalates the situation further. Sometimes we save ourselves time by nipping something in the bud straight away rather than ignoring it, thinking it's low priority, and suddenly then it becomes priority in the environment. And don't leave it to other people as well. Even if you think this is more than I can cope with, let somebody else know if you recognize those signs of escalation. Don't ignore it. Stay calm, stay grounded, take a breath, and always respond rather than react when it comes to escalated states. Recognizing escalation is about being attuned to the subtle shifts that signal someone is struggling. It's a skill that requires observation, empathy, and self-awareness. By understanding the stages of escalation, knowing the individual's baseline, and staying aware of your own responses, you can create safer, calmer environments for everyone involved. Remember, prevention starts with recognition, and recognition starts with paying attention. If you found anything on today's episode useful or interesting, please like, comment, and share. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, You can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more, with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge, and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description.